Part 1. In Chapter 1 of The Gunslinger, a mysterious man in black flees across a vast, barren desert pursued relentlessly by the gunslinger. The desert is harsh, empty, and blinding, with only the faint outline of mountains and devil grass marking the landscape. The gunslinger, carrying his father's finely crafted guns and a water bag, is experienced, disciplined, and highly attuned to his surroundings, noticing even subtle changes in terrain and remnants of the man in black's campfires. For 2 months he has tracked his quarry, finding no ordinary traces, only carefully arranged, burned devil grass ideographs and minimal signs of sustenance, suggesting intelligence and control. As evening falls, he builds a small fire from devil grass, observing the stars and the slow burning flames, reflecting on his past losses, the meaning of his weapons, and the desert's demands. Though weary and isolated, he remains focused, patient, and determined, drawing closer to the man in black as he continues his relentless pursuit. In Chapter 2, the gunslinger travels alone across desolate foothills, leading his exhausted mule, passing abandoned settlements mostly inhabited by lepers or madmen. One madman gifts him a compass meant for the man Jesus, which the gunslinger accepts. After 5 days without contact, he reaches a sod-roofed hut where a young man Brown tends a corn patch. They exchange greetings, and the gunslinger learns of a previous visitor, a sorcerer searching for a place called Algulciento, who had stayed with Brown and discussed mundane matters. Brown introduces his pet raven, Zoltan, who interacts humorously with both men. The gunslinger fetches water from Brown's carefully constructed spring and observes Brown preparing dinner. They converse briefly about survival, the man in black, and the scarcity of life beyond the desert. Exhausted from traveling long days since the horrors of Tull, the gunslinger reflects on the approaching desert and the pursuit of the man in black before finally sleeping. In Chapter 3, the gunslinger is awakened by Brown to find that his mule has died, apparently from exhaustion, and its eyes eaten by Brown's raven Zoltan. Brown casually explains the mule has been roasted and boiled for food. They sit to eat, and Brown offers a brief blessing for rain, health, and spiritual growth. During their meal of roasted corn, the gunslinger asks Brown about belief in an afterlife. Brown confirms he believes the present life is all there is, showing his pragmatic and grounded view. The chapter focuses on survival, the loss of the mule, and the philosophical exchange between the gunslinger and Brown, highlighting the harsh realities of the desert and the necessity of making do with what is available. In Chapter 4, the gunslinger eats a sparse meal of beans and tough corn with Brown while the wind howls outside. Zoltan the raven enters, and the gunslinger jokes about eating him, but Brown dismisses it. After dinner, the gunslinger offers tobacco, which Brown smokes without asking questions. They discuss Tull. Brown recalls the town briefly, describing a short, heavy rain and his corn harvest. The gunslinger recounts his near death in Tull and killing a man touched by God, realizing it was the man in black's trap. Brown listens without interruption, and the gunslinger steps outside to relieve himself, reflecting on whether he is losing his mind or if Brown is some enchantment of the man in black. Returning inside, he questions Brown's nature. Brown insists he is just a man with no ill intent. Invited, the gunslinger begins to recount the events in Tull, speaking openly as night deepens. In Chapter 5, the gunslinger arrives in Tull after purchasing a mule in Pricetown and crossing the desolate prairie, noting the barren, decayed landscape, abandoned dwellings, and suspicious townsfolk. Entering the hollow-shaped town, he observes its crumbling structures, dim lamps, small graveyard, and residents, including an old man, a scrawny tailor, children, and apathetic townsfolk. He secures lodging for his mule and learns of Sheb's Cafe, where he orders 3 hamburgers and a beer, paying with a gold piece which draws the attention of patrons, including a threatening bald man. Inside, he witnesses a gangrenous-handed old man mesmerized by the coin, emptying the room, while Sheb scolds the chaos and expresses her helplessness. The gunslinger inquires about the man in black, sensing Sheb knows more but is constrained by fear. The chapter ends with him directing Sheb to close the lights as she reluctantly obeys, leading him upstairs in darkness, setting the stage for the impending confrontation and highlighting the town's decay and the man in black's influence. In Chapter 6, the gunslinger shares cigarettes with Sheb in darkness, noting her lilac scent mingled with the desert air. She identifies the man he noticed in Tull as Nort, explaining he is dead. Nort had been in Tull for as long as she could remember, descending into madness and substance abuse, wearing green pants that smelled of decay. Children followed him and dogs harassed him as he imagined himself a king with jesters and princes. Sheb recounts Nort's death in front of her cafe. He clumped down the boardwalk in his engineer boots, grinning with